The son kicked his father out to please his wife, but then Jesus taught him a lesson he'll never forget. This image captures one of humanity's most painful family betrayals, an elderly parent being turned away from their child's home. Though clearly a staged photograph illustrating a moral parable, it touches profound truths about family obligations, marital dynamics, respect for elders, and divine justice that resonate across cultures and generations. Scene is heartbreaking in its simplicity. An elderly person, bent with age, stands clutching two worn suitcases at a doorway. Behind them, a younger couple appears, the man pointing firmly away in unmistakable dismissal while the woman beside him radiates satisfaction. On the left, a figure in white robes with a red sash observes, clearly representing Jesus Christ as witness to this family tragedy. The universal story tales like this appear throughout religious traditions and folklore because they address a fundamental human anxiety. What happens when we become old and dependent? Will our children honor us in vulnerability or discard us when we're no longer useful? This fear haunts humanity because aging is inevitable. The narrative follows a familiar pattern. A son builds his own life and marries. His wife finds the elderly father burdensome. Perhaps he requires care, cramps their lifestyle, or simply reminds them of mortality they'd rather avoid. She pressures her husband to remove his father from their home. The son, caught between spousal harmony and filial duty, makes the devastating choice to abandon his parent. This decision violates one of humanity's oldest moral imperatives. Honor your father and mother appears not just in Christianity's 10 Commandments, but across religions. Judaism weights it equally with duties to God. Islam's Quran repeatedly instructs kindness toward parents, forbidding even disrespectful words. Hinduism and Buddhism consider parental reverence essential to spiritual development. Confucian philosophy places filial piety at the very center of ethical life, the foundation of all other virtues. The universality of this principle reveals something profound about human society. Communities that fail to care for elders lose accumulated wisdom, stability, and moral coherence. When the young abandon the old, they sever the intergenerational bonds that transmit values, knowledge, and identity. They also establish a terrible precedent, for how they treat their parents establishes how their own children will someday treat them. Understanding each character, the son faces a genuine conflict between marital harmony and parental duty. Traditional wisdom says a spouse becomes one's primary family, yet this priority cannot justify abandoning parents. The son likely experiences cognitive dissonance, psychological discomfort from holding contradictory beliefs. He knows abandonment is wrong, yet desperately wants peace with his wife. Rather than seeking solutions honoring both relationships, he takes what seems the path of least resistance. This reveals character weakness. A stronger person would set boundaries with their spouse, explaining that while multi-generational living has challenges, they cannot abandon a parent who sacrificed to raise them. A mature spouse would respect such moral clarity. His capitulation suggests either his wife's demands are tyrannical or he lacks courage to resist pressure. Either scenario reveals a marriage built on unhealthy dynamics. True partnership involves mutual respect for each other's values and obligations, not ultimatums forcing one person to betray their conscience. The wife's role deserves examination without simplistic vilification. Perhaps she genuinely struggles with caregiving demands beyond her capacity. Maybe financial pressures make supporting 3 adults impossible. Perhaps the father-in-law treats her disrespectfully, making home life unbearable. However, the image suggests something darker, her satisfied expression and body. Language indicate not reluctant necessity, but pleasure in the father's expulsion. This reveals either cruelty or profound selfishness. Even if legitimate concerns existed about living arrangements, a compassionate person would ensure the elderly father had somewhere safe to go, would feel sorrow rather than satisfaction at his departure. Her demand that her husband abandon his father also shows stunning short-sightedness. She's establishing that family members can be discarded when inconvenient. What happens when she ages, becomes ill, or needs care? She's teaching her husband that loyalty is conditional, that vows and bonds mean nothing against personal comfort. this lesson will inevitably return to haunt her. The elderly father represents all vulnerable people who depend on family mercy. His worn suitcases suggest a life of modest means and hard work. He likely sacrificed enormously to raise his son, forgoing personal pleasures, working extra hours, making his child's welfare his priority. Now, when he most needs support, he's repaid with rejection. His emotional state is unimaginable. Beyond the practical crisis of where he'll sleep tonight, he faces soul-crushing betrayal. The child he nurtured, whose diapers he changed, whose education he funded, whose problems he solved, this child now rejects him. The pain of such betrayal exceeds mere homelessness. It strikes at identity, dignity, and the meaning of one's life sacrifices. The presence of Christ, the figure of Jesus observing this scene, adds crucial dimension. His presence indicates that human actions, especially toward the vulnerable, don't escape divine notice. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus consistently identifies with the marginalized, poor, sick, and abandoned. In Matthew 25, he teaches that how we treat the least of these reflects how we treat him. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Jesus' teachings about family responsibilities were unambiguous. Though he called disciples to follow him, he condemned those who used religious devotion as excuse to avoid supporting parents. In Mark 7, Jesus criticizes those who declared resources devoted to God to avoid helping parents, calling this hypocrisy and violation of God's commandment. The Gospels also record Jesus' care for his own mother. Even while dying on the cross, in excruciating pain, Jesus ensures Mary will be cared for, entrusting her to the disciple John. This example powerfully demonstrates that no circumstance excuses abandoning parental responsibility. The lesson, while the image's caption promises a lesson he'll never forget, we must consider what form such divine teaching might take. Religious stories often feature dramatic reversals, where wrongdoers face consequences mirroring their sins, leading to repentance and transformation. Perhaps the lesson comes through immediate circumstances turning against the son. Maybe financial disaster strikes, his wife leaves him, or he faces his own abandonment, allowing him to experience his father's pain firsthand. Such poetic justice appears frequently in moral tales. The measure we give returns to us more profoundly. The lesson might be spiritual awakening. Perhaps that night, unable to sleep, the son is haunted by his father's face. Perhaps Jesus appears in dreams or through conscience's voice, asking searching questions. Is this who you want to be? Is your wife's temporary displeasure worth your father's suffering and your soul's corruption? What will you tell your children about why grandfather disappeared? The deepest lessons don't come through external punishment but internal transformation. The moment when we truly see ourselves, recognize our failure, and choose differently. Genuine repentance involves more than feeling sorry. It requires making restitution, however difficult. If this son learns his lesson, he must find his father, beg forgiveness, and bring him home. This might cost his marriage if his wife refuses to accept his decision. That painful consequence would itself be instructive, revealing that a relationship demanding moral compromise isn't worth maintaining. He must also examine what led to this failure. Was he so conflict avoidant that he couldn't stand firm on principles, so desperate for approval that he betrayed family, so materialistic that comfort outweighed duty? Understanding his weakness helps prevent future failures. Broader social implications. This story resonates because elder abandonment, while rarely this dramatic, occurs frequently in modern society. Nursing homes and assisted living facilities often become warehouses where families deposit aging relatives and visit rarely. Adult children move across continents, leaving elderly parents isolated. Economic systems prioritize productivity over caregiving, making elder care financially catastrophic for families. While institutional care sometimes represents the most responsible choice given medical needs, too often it reflects desire to avoid inconvenience. The attitude treating elders as burdens rather than honored family members corrodes social fabric. Traditional societies, despite poverty, typically maintained stronger intergenerational bonds. Extended families live together or nearby, sharing caregiving responsibilities. Elders contributed through wisdom, child care, and household help until unable, then received care as natural family responsibility. Modern individualism and mobility fragment these patterns. We prioritize career advancement, personal fulfillment, and nuclear family privacy over extended family obligations. This creates crisis as populations age. Who cares for vast numbers of elderly when family bonds have weakened? The solution isn't simply returning to past arrangements, which had problems including limited opportunities for women and youth, perpetuation of abuse dynamics, and economic inefficiency. Rather, we need new models honoring both individual autonomy and family responsibility. Through supportive housing arrangements, economic policies supporting caregivers, community resources assisting families, and cultural shifts revaluing elder care. The spiritual core. Ultimately, this story is about recognizing the sacred in the vulnerable. Every religious tradition teaches that how we treat those unable to repay us reveals our true character. The elderly, sick, disabled, and poor become spiritual tests. Will we serve them despite lack of reward? Jesus taught that greatness comes through service, that the first shall be last, that we find our lives by losing them. Caring for an aging parent embodies these principles. It's inconvenient, sometimes thankless, often exhausting. It requires sacrificing personal comfort for another's dignity. Yet in this sacrifice, we become more fully human, more divine, more aligned with love's demands. The son in this story forgot that the elderly person he's discarding is not just a burden, but a human being of infinite worth, created in God's image, deserving dignity regardless of productivity or convenience. He forgot that this person loved him before he could speak, tended him when helpless, and shaped who he became. Most tragically, he forgot that he too will age, will become dependent, will need mercy. The callousness he shows establishes the world his own old age will inhabit. One where usefulness determines worth, where loyalty is conditional, where comfort trumps compassion. Conclusion. The lesson Jesus teaches in this story isn't complex or mysterious, it's the lesson he taught throughout his ministry. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. The son must learn that no relationship justifies abandoning fundamental moral obligations. He must learn that true love sometimes requires difficult stands against pressure. He must learn that the vulnerable have claims on us that transcend convenience. And perhaps most importantly, he must learn that it's never too late for repentance, to acknowledge wrong, seek forgiveness, and make things right. The greatest lesson isn't avoiding failure, but responding to it with humility, courage, and transformed action. The elderly father deserves better. He deserves a son with courage to honor him despite pressure, with wisdom to find creative solutions to real challenges, with love sufficient to endure inconvenience for the person who first loved him. That is the lesson Jesus teaches, a lesson written in human dignity, divine commandment, and the certain knowledge that we all eventually depend on others' mercy. The real question isn't what lesson Jesus taught the son, but whether he learned it, and whether we, observing this scene, will learn it too.